It is one of the most destructive drugs to various parts of your body and different organs.
You might want to put down your drink to hear this. No amount of alcohol is safe.
I should mention that alcohol is actually considered a class 1 carcinogen or cancer-causing agent by the World Health Organization, so that's the same category as benzene and tobacco smoke.
I hate to break it to you, but the reality is ethanol produces substantial damage to cells. And it does that because when you ingest ethanol, it's broken down into acetaldehyde. And if you thought ethanol was bad, acetaldehyde is particularly bad. Acetaldehyde is poison. It will kill cells. It damages and kills cells, and it is indiscriminate as to which cells it damages and kills. It is the poison, the acetaldehyde itself, that leads to the effect of being inebriated or drunk. I think most people don't realize that being drunk is actually a poison-induced disruption in the way that your neural circuits work.
Alcohol is often used as a sleep aid, but alcohol is quite different in that regard. Alcohol is trying to essentially knock out your cortex.
There is no safe dose of alcohol because alcohol affects the development of synapses of the brain. People who drink at an early age heavily have been shown to have significantly smaller brains and reduced cognitive ability.
When you drink alcohol, it can pass into all the cells and tissues of your body. It has no trouble just passing right into those cells. The fact that it can pass into so many organs and cells so easily is really what explains its damaging effects. Ethanol produces substantial damage to cells. And it does that because when you ingest ethanol, it has to be converted into something else because it is toxic to the body. It's broken down into acetaldehyde. And if you thought ethanol was bad, acetaldehyde is particularly bad. Acetaldehyde is poison. It will kill cells. It damages and kills cells, and it is indiscriminate as to which cells it damages and kills.
Alcohol it's a hell of a drug, man.
The key thing to understand here is that when you ingest alcohol, you are, yes, ingesting a poison, and that poison is converted into an even worse poison in your body. It is the poison, the acetaldehyde itself, that leads to the effect of being inebriated or drunk. I think most people don't realize that being drunk is actually a poison-induced disruption in the way that your neural circuits work. In thinking about the biochemical effects of alcohol and what it's doing to the body, what it's doing in all cases, it's consumed into the gut. The liver immediately starts this conversion, ethanol to acetaldehyde to acetate, and some amount of acetaldehyde and acetate are making it into the brain. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. Most things, thankfully, can't pass across the blood-brain barrier, but alcohol, because it's water and fat soluble, just cruises right across this fence and into the milieu, the environment of.
So it goes into every nook and cranny in the brain, and there it has lots of influences. So it slows down the excitatory signals, it speeds up the inhibitory signals.
No family in Britain which doesn't have someone who's been damaged by alcohol.
There's a slight suppression in the activity of neurons in the prefrontal cortex. This is an area of your neocortex that's involved in thinking and planning, perhaps above all in suppression of impulsive behavior. And as you shut down the prefrontal cortex, that GABAergic suppression of impulses starts to be released. So people will say things that they want to say without so much forethought about what they're saying. Or they might do things that they want to do without really thinking it through quite as much, or they might not even remember thinking it through at all. One of the more important things to know about the effects of alcohol in the brain is areas of the brain that are involved in flexible behavior, sort of considering different options, like I could do A or I could do B. Those brain areas basically shut down.
Probably the most common detriment that alcohol has to the brain is the fact that alcohol is a depressant to the central nervous system. So it impairs your judgment, it impairs your reflexes, and your ability to think through.
And top-down inhibition is diminished. That is, habitual behavior and impulsive behavior starts to increase. This is true in the short term, so after people have 1 or 2, maybe 3 or 4 drinks. But it's also true that the more often that people drink, there are changes in the very circuits that underlie habitual and impulsive behavior. For the person that drinks, say, every Thursday night, or goes out only on Saturdays, but every Saturday, there's evidence that there are changes in the neural circuits of the brain that control habitual behavior and impulsive behavior, and they are modified and strengthened in ways that make those people more habitual and more impulsive outside the times in which they are drinking. And when they drink, impulsive and habitual behavior tends to increase even further. When we ingest alcohol, the toxic effects of alcohol disrupt those mood circuitries, at first making them hyperactive. This is why people become really talkative. People start to feel really good after a few sips of alcohol, at least most people do. Then as they ingest more alcohol, serotonin levels and the activity of those circuits really starts to drop. And that's why people feel less good. And typically what they do, they go and get another drink and they attempt to kind of restore that feeling of well-being and mood. Now, typically what happens is that as people ingest the third and fourth, maybe even the fifth drink, there's an absolute zero chance of them recovering that energized mood, right? Most people, as they drink more and more, will now start to feel more and more suppressed. The forebrain is now shutting down quite a lot. A lot of the motor cortical areas that control coordinated movement and deliberate movement start to shut down. So people start to slur their speech, people start to shuffle their feet, people forget their posture, people start to lean on things, people start passing out on couches. There's a great depression.
It makes you more extroverted and enthusiastic while you're on the ascending limb of the blood alcohol curve, which is why you have to keep drinking once you start. Because if you plateau, that goes away. So you got to keep drinking. Okay, so that's one thing. It makes you more enthusiastic and more full of positive emotion. And the second thing it does is reduce anxiety.
Yeah.
And so if you are a bit more socially anxious and you also have that positive response to alcohol, which everyone doesn't have, by the way, then it's a great drug. But the problem is it's a great drug for the moment.
Right.
Right. There's consequences.
There is no safe dose of alcohol because alcohol affects the development of synapses of the brain. People who drink at an early age heavily have been shown to have significantly smaller brains and reduced cognitive ability.
They can now see and not have to wait till autopsy studies. The gray matter, the actual neurons that are the structure of the brain shrink. You know, you've probably heard, oh, you're killing brain cells. Well, you actually are.
A recent study, however, finally addressed the question of whether or not low to moderate amounts of alcohol consumption can cause brain degeneration. What they found was that even for people that were drinking low to moderate amounts of alcohol, so 1 or 2 drinks per day, there was evidence of thinning of the neocortex, so loss of neurons in the neocortex, and other brain regions.
Binge drinking definitely kills brain cells. It alters neural communication in such a way that it can change the structure and the function of the brain for a long term. Anytime you binge drink, you're going to alter the brain, probably permanently. The plasticity can help it recover, but the more you do this, the less likely you are to be able to sort of overcome those perturbations.
If people are ingesting alcohol chronically, even if it's not every night, there are well-recognized changes in neural circuits, there are well-recognized changes in neurochemistry within the brain, and there are well-recognized changes in the brain-to-body stress system that generally point in 3 directions. Increased stress when people are not drinking, diminished mood and feelings of well-being when people are not drinking, and, as you'll soon learn, changes in the neural circuitry that cause people to want to drink even more in order to get just back to baseline, or the place that they were in terms of their stress modulation and in terms of their feelings of mood before they ever started drinking in the first place.
And this is where alcohol is a really clever drug. Alcohol is a very promiscuous drug. It gets into the brain and it changes all the good neurotransmitters that you want to change. You know, a bit of endorphins, a bit of serotonin, a bit of GABA. You know, it's a really clever drug. And gradually it sort of worms its way into you. So eventually it kind of takes over and you get to the situation like, you know, you described, and, you know, I've had patients of mine who say they just find themselves drink. They don't even intend to drink. They're just suddenly there drinking. They don't know how they got there. They don't want to do it. They don't even enjoy it very much, but they can't stop. It becomes a compulsion.
So there's an increase in dopamine and an increase in serotonin. So it's kind of an increase in well-being, an increase in mood, but it's a very short-lived increase. Very soon after, and actually triggered by that increase, is a long and slow reduction in dopamine and serotonin and related molecules and circuits. What you're getting is a blip of feel-good followed by a long, slow arc of feeling not so great, which is why typically people will drink again and again across the night. And many people make the mistake of then going and pursuing the dopamine evoking, the dopamine releasing activity or substance again, thinking mistakenly that it's going to bring up their baseline. It's going to give them that peak again. Not only does it not give them a peak, their baseline gets lower and lower because they're depleting dopamine more and more and more. And we've seen this over and over again. When people get addicted to something, then they're not achieving much pleasure at all. Addiction is a progressive narrowing of the things that bring you pleasure. So oftentimes what will happen is the person only has excitement and can achieve dopamine release to the same extent doing that behavior and not other behaviors. And so they start losing interest in relationships, they start losing interest in fitness and well-being and depletes their life. And eventually what typically happens is they will stop getting dopamine release from that activity as well. And then they drop into a pretty serious depression. And this can get very severe, and people have committed suicide from these sorts of patterns of activity.
But alcohol has effects in lots of different areas of the brain, not just that sort of reward area, but it's also involved in a range of other neurotransmitters beyond dopamine. So, things like glutamate and GABA and other parts of the brain, the hippocampus, which is involved in memory, the cerebellum, which is the back part of your brain that's involved in motor coordination. And likewise, when someone is alcohol dependent, it is one of the most destructive drugs to various parts of your body and different organ systems. Worst case scenarios can be things like alcohol-related dementia or delirium, which are serious brain problems, or cirrhosis would be another really major problem. These are things that people become extremely ill and need to go into a nursing home, or people just die from.
Because alcohol is sort of this very generic drug, it's the most widely acting substance I know of. It acts on proteins in every body system, not just the brain, but on the kidneys, on the liver, you name it, it acts there. And so it's a pharmacological hand grenade because it indiscriminately can alter the function of proteins in cells everywhere in your body. Alcohol causes depression. It causes the opposite. It doesn't relieve anxiety. It causes anxiety if the main thing in your internal or external world is a negative thing. Alcohol will exaggerate that context.
People who ingest alcohol at any amount are inducing a disruption in the so-called gut microbiome, the trillions of little microbacteria that take resident in your gut and that live inside you all the time and that help support your immune system and that literally signal by way of electrical signals and chemical signals to your brain to increase the release of things like serotonin and dopamine and regulate your mood, generally in positive ways. Well, alcohol really disrupts those bacteria. Alcohol kills bacteria, and it is indiscriminate with respect to which bacteria it kills. So when we ingest alcohol and it goes into our gut, it kills a lot of the healthy gut microbiota. At the same time, the metabolism of alcohol in the liver, which you now understand, that pathway involving NAD, acetaldehyde, and acetate, that pathway is pro-inflammatory, so it's increasing the release of inflammatory cytokines. All these pro-inflammatory molecules, those are being released. You've now got disruption of the gut microbiota. As a consequence, the lining of the gut is disrupted, and you develop, at least transiently, leaky gut. That is, bacteria that exist in the gut, which are bad bacteria, can now pass out of the gut into the bloodstream. So you've got bad bacteria from partially broken down food moving out of the gut. The good bacteria in the gut have been killed, and so now you've got leaks in the gut wall. You've got the release of this bad bacteria. You've got inflammatory cytokines and other things being released from the liver, and they are able to get into the brain through what's called a neuroimmune signaling. The net effect of this is actually to disrupt the neural circuits that control regulation of alcohol intake. And the net effect of that is increased alcohol consumption. So this is just terrible, right? I mean, so you're taking in something that disrupts two systems, the gut microbiota, and it disrupts it in two ways. It's killing the good gut microbiota, and it's allowing the bad bacteria to move from the gut into the bloodstream. You've also got pro-inflammatory cytokines coming from the liver, and those converge or arrive in the brain and create a system in which the neural circuits cause more drinking. That's a bad situation, and this is why people who drink regularly, even if it's not a ton of alcohol, what you end up with is a situation in which you have inflammation in multiple places in the brain and body, and the desire to drink even more and to further exacerbate that inflammation and the gut leakiness.
There was this conception that alcohol had some benefits with regards to some cardiovascular diseases. More recent studies now find that that is probably not the case.
Alcohol is one of the leading behavior-related causes of health problems and deaths, and also some social problems and economic costs, ranging from things like injuries and accidents to cancers and actually heart and cardiovascular disease. So it causes a wide range of health effects. When it comes to health, less is more. I should mention that alcohol is actually considered a class 1 carcinogen or cancer-causing agent by the World Health Organization. So that's the same category as benzene and tobacco smoke. And some studies estimate that a drink of alcohol has about the same cancer-causing potential as 1 to 2 cigarettes, depending on your sex.
In Western cultures, alcohol is the most harmful drug overall because it's the most harmful drug to society, because it's the most widely used drug.
Yeah, and alcohol also makes people aggressive. It's the only drug we know that actually makes people aggressive. So you see a massive effect on crime rates, because half the people who murder someone are drunk.
Oh, yeah.
And half the people who are murdered are drunk. If we had to make a bad drug legal, the worst choice was alcohol.
Almost every family in Britain is affected, but we don't own up to it, right? We kind of push it under the carpet. You know, we know there's a problem, but we don't talk about it because, well, we don't know what to do about it. We're embarrassed. People are fearful of other drugs, illegal drugs, because it helps deflect their attention away from the problems of alcohol. Politicians love to get hysterical about a new drug because it means they can do something about drugs and don't have to be held to account over their failure to deal with the problems of alcohol.
Is drinking good for me in any way? For instance, many people have probably heard that resveratrol is good for people and that red wine is enriched in resveratrol. I hate to break it to you, but the reality is that if indeed resveratrol is good for us, and there's some debate about this, some people say strongly yes, some people say no, other people say maybe, the amount of red wine that one would have to drink in order to get enough resveratrol in order for it to be health promoting is so outrageously high that it would surely induce other negative effects that would offset the positive effects of resveratrol. No consumption, zero consumption of 0 ounces of alcohol is going to be better for your health than low to moderate consumption of alcohol.
You do stupid things when you're drunk. You hurt yourself, you compromise your health, it's really hard on the people around you, you tend to turn into a liar, and it screws up your life.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, but it's pretty fun. Yeah, well, it is, but you need something better than that. And what's better isn't being straight and not making mistakes. It's like that's all prohibition in some sense. What's better is, no, you need an adventure, man. You need to get out there and have something to do.
Yeah.
And something worth waking up for. And that's the substitute for the addiction.
This is why I don't like alcohol, and this is why I don't like drugs, because you're not in control. A substance is doing that. Right? But it's a good thing that you have this rage, because if we can take this 97 octane fuel and we put it in the right engine, controlled, oh my gosh. So we need to make sure that high octane is controlled, because high octane in the wrong place can blow up a building.